there has to be some kind of acknowledgement that you made a mistake.
Yeah.
It's like the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Like
Yeah.
you have to say, I made a mistake. And ideally what you would do is you'd say, I'm sorry. Like, isn't that what the whole Alcoholics Anonymous is? Like, I made a mistake. I treated you this way. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like, this is not a great lift. Like, this is not a tremendous ask.
No.
It doesn't cost you any money. Like, and it will make you a better person.
Hello. In today's episode, I'm joined by philosopher, educator, and author Peter Boghossian, and we're talking about some really cool stuff. Peter is best known for his work in street epistemology, a method of having constructive conversations that challenge deeply held beliefs in a thoughtful and productive way. With a background in philosophy and education, Peter taught at Portland State University for several years, where he focused on ethics, critical thinking, and yes, the Socratic method. I highly recommend you check out his work and watch some of his videos. I will put the info in the show notes below. In our chat, we kick things off by talking about why Peter's in Lisbon and why he's been trying to spark open dialogue with people who hold opposing views. If you're interested in what cults do to our thinking, you will find this conversation fascinating. How do we know what we know, and how can we have better conversations with people who think differently? I know, crazy question, right? Peter also shares his thoughts on why people tend to cling so tightly to their beliefs, even when they're faced with evidence that contradicts them. We talk about the role of identity in holding onto these beliefs and why it can be so hard to change our minds. There's also a great discussion about how institutions like schools and universities have been ideologically captured and how postmodern thinking has shifted the focus from objective truth to subjective experiences. This episode is all about challenging yourself, staying open to new ideas, and revising your beliefs when the evidence calls for it. Peter's got some amazing insights on why curiosity and honest conversation are more important than ever, especially in today's polarized world. So, let's jump into this insightful discussion with Peter Boghossian. Peter, thank you very much for joining me.
Pleasure.
You're in Lisbon. Where in Lisbon? Like, why are you in Lisbon?
That's a great question. I'm in Lisbon because I'm with GenSpect, GenSpect, and Stella O'Malley is the organizer of GenSpect. And every year I do this because I have a bad shoulder, not because I'm being defensive.
Was it jiu-jitsu?
Yeah. Well, I keep injuring it in jiu-jitsu and guys keep cranking on it. But WPATH is like the trans activist organization, and everywhere they go, GenSpect follows and has their conference. I think in Lisbon, it's the exact same time. I think it's literally one street away. So I invited, being a big believer in discourse, dialogue, and conversation, I invited the WPATH people to come and have a live conversation with me on stage. Not a debate, Mark, not a debate, a conversation. And of course, they refused to have that conversation. Of course, they refused.
So what's going to happen?
It's a great question. So I genuinely believe that the people who consider us their ideological enemies, no matter who the us in that sentence is, it's incumbent upon rational people to create arguments better than they could. So my goal is to create kind of epistemological and moral infrastructure for their arguments, and then look at 5-6 arguments that they make and try to present those arguments better than they could, and then invite people down from the audience to try to rebut those arguments.
Oh, I like that. That's cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Before we get into street epistemology, what is wrong with the world?
Oh my God, dude, this is like, how long do we have for this podcast?
Like, what's wrong with it? What's the cause? Like, what's the cause of the shit that's wrong in the world?
Oh my God, that is such a big
I know.
I mean, I don't even know. You got to narrow that down a little bit, because I could speak for hours.
There's shit that you think is wrong in the world. Yes.
Yeah, lots.
Yeah. What's causing? Why? What's the cause? Do you think?
No, number one problem, in my opinion, facing the United States right now is the debt. I've tweeted about it. I talked about it. No one gives a shit. Oh, can I swear?
As much as you want.
Okay.
This podcast is called "What the Fuck Is on My Mind."
Okay, that's pretty good to know. I think WTF, right? Okay, so yeah, no one cares. No one cares. No. In the last election, no one asked Trump about what his plans were. No one asked Harris what her plans were. No one gives a shit. So okay, well, I mean, I'm going to be dead. You're probably going to be dead, so we don't have to worry about it. But So that's in my opinion, that's one of that's the most important problem the country faces. Even if you want to make the argument that that's not true, it's the border. Well, you can't fix the border if you have no money. What are you going to do? Just get people to volunteer? And even if you got them to volunteer to make a wall, how are you going to get the resources? Then how are you going to buy? Like the debt is the source of everything. It's like it's unsustainable. So that's a problem. But more broadly and philosophically, the problem is that, and I would have answered this question. I'll tell you how I would have answered it 10 years ago when I was a member of the New Atheist, when that was at its height. I would have said that people don't formulate their beliefs on the basis of evidence. Now my response would be, people formulate the beliefs on what they think, their beliefs on what they think is evidence, but it is simply not evidence. It's something else. It's a moral hunch. It's an intuition.
It's kind of the same though, isn't it?
No. Like, so for example, many atheists will believe that Christians don't have sufficient reason to justify their confidence in God's existence. But many Christians will believe that the propositions that they believe lead them by necessity to the conclusion. So they think that suite of propositions is sufficient to warrant belief in their conclusion. So they think they have evidence. I don't think they have evidence, but they think they have evidence, or any religion for that matter.
Right.
But it's the same with the trans stuff. It's the same with anything.
Right. Let's get into, because my audience, some of them may not know this word. I didn't know this word until recently. Epistemology.
Okay.
What are we talking about?
It just means how you know what you think you know. It's just it's a big word for knowledge more broadly.
So I spend a lot of time thinking about my thinking and thinking about other people's thinking and why I believe what I believe.
That's the examined life. That's what Socrates says, yeah.
Okay, so street epistemology. This is something I only found out about probably a year ago.
Oh, okay.
Because I was watching your stuff and I was like, holy shit, this is really smart.
Oh, thanks.
So like, what do you guys do when you show up with these things on the ground? Can you just give us a layout of what it is?
Yeah, sure. So I came up with street epistemology in my first book, 2013, and we've refined it. And then Reed, actually, who couldn't be here today, came up with spectrum street epistemology, and we put it on a spectrum. And so we go around the world. I mean, literally Taiwan, Australia. We're about to go to New Zealand for a free speech tour. Hungary. We're here in Lisbon doing it. We go everywhere. And we put the mats on the ground, and it's strongly agree, slightly agree, neutral, and then on the other side. And then we'll ask people what they want to talk about, and we'll formulate something they believe in, and then Reed will write it on the board in case we forget. And so I'll state the claim. I just want to say, so I'm just the guy in front of the camera. There's a whole, Travis is doing the filming. Like there's a whole infrastructure here.
You're like the movie star.
Lita organizes it. I'm just in front of the camera. But really, there's no possible way I couldn't do this without even one person. But anyway, so we'll state a claim, and then I'll ask people questions about what that belief is. In my ideal world, Mark, what I do is I'd have one person on strongly agree, one person on strongly disagree, and one person in the neutral, and would see if those arguments could persuade people or see what's sufficient to cause them to change their beliefs. So it's both a kind of epistemological hygiene in the same way that you use dental floss for your dental hygiene, but it's also teaching people how to converse across a divide: political, epistemological, psychosocial, moral, what have you.
I love it. Why this obsession? Because like some people don't live the examined life, and you're trying to change something.
Yeah.
Why this obsession?
That's a great question. So first of all, your epistemology has to precede everything. It has to precede your metaphysics. In other words, like what you believe is outside physics. It has to precede how you know is the most important thing. And the problem is that you asked me about one of the problems in the world. In my opinion, one of the biggest problems in the world is that they've miscalibrated the evidence they have for their belief and their confidence in a belief. And in many cases, they've radically miscalibrated it. And so they're more confident in propositions or, and statements about the world than they should be. And the consequence of that, there are many consequences, but one is if you want to live a good life, then you have to construct things outside yourself to bring about that good life. And if the starting assumptions that you have are incorrect, like I never cease to amaze myself by the one of the largest scams in U.S. history, which is the food pyramid.
Mm.
The biggest fucking scam, the biggest lie. Grains are at the bottom. You should consume. I mean, think about all the obesity epidemic, et cetera. But anyway, if that's your starting assumption and you want to do what's right, you want to live a good life, and you're basing that off of an incorrect assumption, in that case, it really is like an architectonic structure with a base.
Mm-hmm.
You're basically bringing about the worst possible life. Like you're making yourself obese and unhealthy.
Because every step after that is erroneous.
Yeah, because the starting belief was false. And so you think, oh, well, grains, I have to eat grains 6 times a day. So then you have a muffin in the morning and you avoid fat and protein. You should be doing exactly the opposite. So that's why epistemology is so important. How do you know what you think you know? And and the fact of the matter is that the wide-scale distrust in our institutions is at an all-time high. The philosopher Jürgen Habermas, I don't want to say predicted, but discusses this in his 1973 work, The Legitimation Crisis. So we have a crisis of legitimacy in our institutions.
Gee, I wonder what they could have done to cause that.
Geez, I wonder. And then what they're still doing, you know. I just read just this morning. I can't remember where it's from. I literally just read when I was on the couch sitting outside there that the military is doing away with its diversity requirement. Okay, and I think Wilfred Riley tweeted that must mean we're going to war. I mean, because it has to have a practical import. It's like, and the fact that people either lie about this, or knowingly go along, it's like, so, okay, yes, it's related to this problem, but the larger arc of history, you know, subspecies aeternitatis, under this watchful eye of something much greater than ourselves, this does not bode well for the future of humanity. I mean, this is just not, this is a danger.
I was mentioning to you before, like coming out of a cult, I'm looking around and I'm seeing a lot of the shit that I saw in a cult, and I'm seeing other people doing the behavior and the denial that I was doing when I was inside.
Right.
And trying to make shit work that clearly doesn't work.
Right.
You know? It's kind of horrifying because I'm seeing it on a very large scale now.
Yeah, not only I'll piggyback off of that, not only are you seeing it on a large scale, but many of the individuals and institutions who are ostensibly set up to protect us or would speak out about that themselves have become ideologically captured.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Much of these spaces, you know, Constantine, my friends Constantine Kissin and James Lindsay are talking about the woke right.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Just recently, Constantine put a thing out about that. Yes.
Yeah. So we have situations now in which even the people fighting against illiberalism have themselves become captured by illiberalism.
Yeah.
The best thinker, by the way, on that is going to be in Lisbon tomorrow is Helen Pluckrose.
Oh.
She has some incredible stuff on what liberalism is, what Enlightenment values are, how to live by them.
Fascinating.
Yeah, she's great. I could see if I could set something up if you want.
Yeah. I did a podcast episode about the Socratic method a little while ago.
One of my favorite topics.
Yeah, and it was with Richard Grannon, who I don't believe you've met. You probably know of him.
I know of him.
Richard has a question for you, which I'm going to ask you in a little while. But as Richard and I were talking about the Socratic method, and especially about trying to fortify your position, the other person's position, I should say. I said to him, I recognize that there's a vulnerability in the Socratic method.
Yeah.
Because what I feel is this impending loss of my ideological perspective or this foothold that I have. And it's a very scary thing because I know I'm going to lose something. And Richard said, well, you are, yes. And it's a bit like therapy. Do you find that? Do you find that that it's vulnerable for people to go into these kinds of discussions and examine what they think with the possibility that they may find out that they're wrong?
No, I don't find that at all. In the Gorgias, Socrates says it is better to be refuted than to refute, for that is the greater gain of the two. When you are refuted, that you have a belief about reality that's mistaken and you can correct it. Invariably, people want, I mean, Aristotle says that, and I think that's the first line in the Metaphysics, all men want to, people is the PC now, but, you know, all people want to believe what's true. And I think that's absolutely accurate. People want to believe what's true. I do think so.
Is that though?
Well, I think that they've just latched on to erroneous or false pieces of starting information, like we just talked about. Their starting assumptions are just false. In Theaetetus, Socrates says that if all people had the same starting conditions, they'd come to the same conclusion, say the same information, etc. My mentor used to say that too. I think that's true.
I think you have a beautiful vision of what's possible. I think. What is like your mission? Like what's the world you'd like to see?
I'd like to see a world in which people are civil to each other, they're kind to each other, they formulate their beliefs on the basis of the best available evidence, they're humble in what they claim to know, they're capable, not only capable, but they look at revising their beliefs as a virtue, they attempt to accurately calibrate their beliefs to the evidence, they're forgiving of themselves and others when they make mistakes or errors. They're honest. They speak truth in the face of danger. They speak up to, moral fads or what have you. I mean, I could go on, but I think at core, there is something that is timeless and beautiful about having an unvarnished epistemology. It's the only way out of the mess that we're in. There is just simply no other way. There was literally no other way. Because to get back to the food parameter, you can use any. That's just a conspicuous and egregious example, but then you can see it, right? You can see it in people's bodies. But if the society elevates as a virtue, belief revision, changing your mind, discourse, dialogue. The problem is that we have, and I was just at dinner last night, and someone said, I was with Reed, and this guy said, well, what do you guys do? And I said, I thought it was just gonna be a very safe thing to say. I said, well, we have a small nonprofit, and we go around the world and we advocate for things like free speech. And he said, free speech? And then he starts going off about Jews and Nazis, and I tried to engage him in that, and the whole evening he gave me the cold shoulder. He didn't say goodbye to me. He didn't say anything. And in the end, the guy that the guy who invited us said, don't worry about him. He's friends with Gavin Newsom. And I just thought that was so interesting. Like now, even it's along ideological lines. Like free speech it should be a totally nonpartisan issue. It has nothing to do with Democrat or Republican.
I'm interested in how, because it feels to me like a psyop in the sense that how did the people that are working in this shit associate free speech with fascism?
That's a great question.
It's pretty amazing.
I can tell you how they did that. There's a scholastic infrastructure for that. They did that by, I mentioned this at dinner to the woman to the left of me, and she eviscerated me.
Charming dinners you're having. These are Portuguese people?
No, the free speech guy was anti-free speech guy was an American. Okay. I don't know the woman next to me. I think she was Portuguese, but I'm not sure. So the idea is that you don't even want to be associated or affiliated with someone because that's a kind of contamination. I'll give you a quick example. So, Helen Pluckrose, we did the grievance study stuff together. She's a very good friend of mine. She's just obsessed with tea, like TEA. She's just obsessed with it. And so I put out what I thought was a very clever tweet string. If I must say so myself, we use AI generated voices and we got a lot of people who move in the space to say really positive things about my putting tea in the microwave with stuff. And then we quote tweeted that as a response to Helen. And I'm not going to name the people, but some of them said, oh, Carl Benjamin, who's another friend of mine, he's on the list. I cannot be in the same thing. Please take it down. And I'm like, wow. So there was a kind of moral contamination among, and I truly, Mark, truly from the bottom of my heart, I try to make this as nonpartisan, non-biased as possible. But the fact of the matter is it is coming from one group of people and they are the identitarian left. It's just a fact. It's like you agree with 2% of the things that the people on the right say, or 3%, and they welcome you with open arms. You disagree with like 1% of something, like not transitioning kids until you're 18, or wait until you're 18 before you undergo medical. If you want a double mastectomy, if it's for medical reasons, obviously that's a no-brainer. But if it's for to alleviate your gender distress, but you have to wait till you're 18. Excuse me, but you disagree with one thing. And they lose their fucking minds, right? But so the problem really is, and it's also this kind of idea of offense by proxy. Oh, I'm talking to Mark. Mark has friends with Carl, whatever. So therefore, we can't talk to Mark. We have to make Mark's life miserable. We have to go on every piece of comment, every content, and comment on everything he does with our 50 sock.
You're describing shunning, like happens, in cults. Like, let's take, in my particular cult, anybody that spoke against or questioned was a suppressive. You're taking this fall into basically evil. Yeah. Same with Scientology.
Yeah, squirrels.
Yeah, same thing. And it's by association you're going to get infected.
Yeah, that's right. And it's with Jehovah's Witnesses too. Yeah, it's with the Klingons too. They turn their back and they go like this.
Oh, the Klingons! I forgot about.
It's in everything. Yeah, it's in everything. But that's how they. That's how the. I mean, if you think about it mimetically, that's how the ideology prevents itself from being dislodged, because those communal bonds are one of the things, as you know very well, and from the research literature on cults, those communal bonds are what keep the belief in place. So you can't disrupt the bonds. You have to have the fealty and the integrity of the bonds, and the belief stays in place.
Along those lines, in terms of all the work you've been doing and all the people that you've been with that have maybe changed their minds or held on, why do you think people hold on so tightly to their beliefs? I mean, you mentioned some of it. What is this thing where even presented with evidence, it's just like, no, they just hold on so tightly? Like, why do you think that is?
I can tell you exactly why that is. Because the syllogism for that would be, good people believe good people believe these things. I'm a good person. I believe these things.
Okay.
So it's they cement their idea. They calcify their idea as a good person by holding these beliefs.
Okay.
It's the same reason, this person didn't want to be affiliated with Carl Benjamin, even though it had literally nothing. It was just a tweet string, and he was one of the people on it.
So my identity is dependent on me being a good person, because if I'm not, then my whole life falls apart. Yeah. And so the good people around me are telling me this is good, therefore that is what I have to hold on to, or I'll be cast out.
Yeah, good people believe this. I want to belong, right? That's the only thing people want more than being right, is belonging or being loved. Paul Graham said, and I thought this was true, if you can't, I'm sure I'm going to paraphrase, I'm not going to quote it exactly, but if you can't separate your identity from truth, in other words, if your identity injects static into the system, then you have to really be sure to make as few things as possible a part of your identity. Because once something has identity level salience, people don't change their mind on it.
Right. So
there's one more piece to that. Sorry. There's one more piece. The second piece beyond identity is we now have a very bizarre situation in this kind of postmodern world in which it's not merely identity, it's lived experience. So we've made a turn from the objective to the subjective. So your lived experience is that's why the free speech guy was losing his mind, right? So somebody's lived experience of being called a bad word or what have you is itself trumping any position that you might have.
So to me, I think of postmodernism and reactivity. It's sort of like narcissistic new age belief. I'm feeling this thing, therefore the whole world is this thing. Or right? Yeah. It's like I'm projecting my stuff on everything. And that's what's most important, is what I'm feeling right now, subjectively.
Well, you need one more component to that. You need a component of power in that. Foucault, in two of his works, calls that one word power knowledge, or power/knowledge. Like the people who have historical oppression variables in their ancestry, or the people who have some kind of identity characteristic, trans, African American, or not, there wouldn't be African American here because not in America, but black or what have you. Those people have some special access to the truth, things we can't see.
Like a cult.
Yeah.
It's one of the definitions.
Yeah.
Special knowledge.
They have special knowledge. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And any attempt to disabuse that is what the feminist philosopher, and I think 2017, Alison Bailey said, it's kind of privilege-preserving epistemic pushback. So in other words, you would attempt to say, hey, well, wait a second, what about this?
Mm-hmm.
And then say you're just doing that to preserve your power. Comes from this idea of,
right.
Derek,
I'm not doing it for power. I'm doing it for some altruistic reason.
Yeah, so you can't even question the belief because any question of the belief is that you're trying to preserve your power. Derek Bell said things like that about, the only reason white people gave black people the right to vote is because they felt their power was being. It's kind of reminiscent of Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, where he says he writes about the privileged don't just give up their privilege. Mm. So there is something that's legitimate in all those ideas. Mm-hmm. There's a kernel of legitimacy in all of it, but they just run to crazy town.
Mm-hmm. Postmodernism, I don't think I completely understand it. Can you simply explain what it is? Because I'm still trying to figure out what this is.
The technical definition that Leotard said is it's a incredulity toward meta-narratives. So a meta-narrative is like an overarching belief or principle. And I'm going to give you the layman's answer in a second. So like Christianity would be a meta-narrative. It's a grand explanatory principle for reality. Okay. Science, to a certain extent, would be a meta-narrative. On another more pedestrian level, it's the, God, my shoulder's killing me. It's the fact that people don't possess a God's eye view of something. Mm-hmm. Nagel, the philosopher Nagel, writes, a view from nowhere. There is no view from nowhere. It's always a view from somewhere. Okay. David Deutsch in The Beginning of Infinity does a great job. And the whole thing.
Wait, is that because I experience things subjectively, that's all there really is?
No. Okay, so that's a common misconception. That's a great point that you made. It's not that they're only the fringe maniacs believe there's no objective reality. Okay. I shouldn't call them maniacs, but just nobody actually is a hard skeptic. Mm-hmm. Right? It's called the hard skeptics. The world doesn't really exist. You're a brain of vat. You're in a matrix. Okay. No, literally no one. No, I mean, certainly nobody acts like that.
Right.
It's the idea that everything you know is mediated through some power relationship.
Okay.
So we can know things, but what we know is we know it in this larger nexus of how things are related through power relations.
Okay. So it doesn't require evidence. Biology is up for questioning.
Would you say what is?
It's biology is up for questioning.
That's really insightful.
Yeah. Has been.
Have you ever noticed, if I can comment on, have you ever noticed it's always biology with folks who criticize? It's never like, gravity or, I
was wondering about gravity.
UV rays. It's always biology that's questioned because that's the one thing that interferes or creates the most potential damage to an ideology is biology. It's never like electromagnetism or Planck's constant or anything like that.
Right. So evolutionary biology really pisses people off.
Yeah, and so that's why you see large-scale biology nihilism. Sex is a spectrum or any of this other nonsense. Don't worry, we're going to figure all this stuff out pretty soon.
But within the next 20 minutes, yeah. I want to take a quick pause to ask you, my audience, for a favor. This podcast is possible because of the goodwill and generosity of my Patreon members. If you like the stuff I'm talking about, please head over there and become a member. www.patreon.com/Mark Vicente. Also, whatever platform you listen, watch this on, please subscribe, follow, and give me a good rating. I really want to grow this podcast and invite ever more interesting guests to come on. Now, back to the episode. In terms of the street epistemology you do, are there kinds of people that are the most resistant to exploration that you've seen? And I don't mean
That's a great question.
Left or right. I mean kinds, like archetypes.
Yeah. Your questions are great. Yes, with a big question mark. And the problem that we have is we can't get the people who won't come to the lines to come to the lines. So it's all voluntary. So our sample is just skewed because we don't know what the people who don't come to the lines believe because they don't come to the lines. Or the mats. The other problem is that there's a bias. Like I can tell you now, I've done this so much all around the world. I can tell you by looking with someone with an incredible high degree of accuracy whether or not they will do this. And the number one variable is, you know what it is? You want to take a guess?
I thought it was eye contact.
Nope. Age.
Really?
Yeah. Older people just won't do it. Younger people will like drive by, get off their bike and do it.
More neuroplasticity or what?
I think they're just camera shy.
Okay. You need to force those people that won't come, right?
Well, I'd love to know I'd love to have their voice heard, but they won't do it. So it's a voluntary thing. And I don't want to pay them because that injects, it's not authentic that way.
But it's good that you're saying that, you know, you're not saying, oh, I have the answer to everything. So the most open are younger people.
The most willing to do the exercise are young people.
Okay.
The people who hold on to a belief for moral reasons are the least likely to move mats, to change from, say, slightly agree to agree.
Just going back to what you said earlier, like I've never done this exercise. Funnily enough, in our cult, we did exercises. We did one particular educational module called My Way, where you sat and argued with somebody, and then you had to swap.
Yeah, that's a great exercise.
Do their argument.
That's a great exercise.
And at times I was very resistant, but I got so much out of it because I realized actually there's something in there that I'd never thought of before that I kind of like. And there's this epiphany type of climax, brain climax that happens where you're like, oh shit, I never thought of that. That's exciting.
So let me throw this out to you. Imagine being in a community where not doing that is considered a virtue. That's the situation in which we find ourselves. And that is the situation in which our institutions, our K-12 institutions and institutions of our higher ed are beholden to that. It is a virtue to not argue for the other side.
I hear you. There's evidence of what you're saying. I do not fucking understand how. I don't understand the line bending that occurred to get there.
Easily explain it to you.
Please.
Effortless explanation. Easy. It's good because sometimes people ask me things, I'm like, oh man, I have no idea. I know I always say I don't know if people ask me something I don't know. And when we do the street epistemology, someone says, I don't know, I always say that's a great answer because we need to move people in the direction of saying, I don't know, and they don't know. That way they don't pretend to know things they don't know. Because we've moved, our educational system has moved from truth-finding institutions and helping people develop corrective mechanisms to be less wrong more often. They've moved from that to what the Brazilian educator Paulo Freire talks about as the pedagogy of the oppressed. To the purpose of education is to alleviate oppression. And he has this thing called the banking method, which he calls basically what he describes roughly, but open head, open skull, insert knowledge, closed skull, regurgitate. So the purpose of education now is both to alleviate oppression, and it's because it's a business, it's to keep and retain students and market and recruit more students. So I personally don't think that we can come back from that, and I think it's great. And I can give you overwhelming evidence that that's true. Like
that we're not going to come back.
Well, no. I mean, of course we're not going to come back.
I don't see how we could, given the incentives that you're suggesting.
Well, look, so that's the other thing. We ask people, what would it take to change your mind? The defeasibility question. It's called defeasibility. In science, it's called, falsifiability, from Popper's famous piece. I think it was 1953, if memory serves me correctly. But anyway, this is one. What would it take to change my mind? I'll tell you right now. Fire plagiarists if they're African Americans or white or Native Americans or what have you. I think the University of Maryland president was just found to have plagiarized 1,500 words, almost verbatim. But they don't. I'm going to say why they don't fire him. They don't fire him because he has historical oppression variables. So we don't fire people. Claudine Gay, president of Harvard, kept her $900,000. She lost her position, but she kept her $900,000 a year job, her position, and full tenure. The three people in that diversity office, it could be four by now, but please, I invite your audience to fact check me, were also caught plagiarizing their dissertations, but they won't be fired.
But because that's okay.
Well, of course it's okay. It's because they're black. Why you want to reform the institution? It's irrelevant what color someone is. They have to be held to ethical. All people have to be held to the same ethical standards. It doesn't matter if you're black or 2 feet tall or morbidly obese. Like, that's why people don't trust. That's one reason. There are others, but that's one reason why people don't trust our institutions. They've obtained their credentials through fraud. through fraud. They've cheated. They've lied. And now they're teaching people. I mean, it's completely insane. But if I said to you 15 years ago, hey, Mark, we should fire, if you're an academic, I say, hey, man, we should fire people who plagiarize. Someone would look at me like I'm insane. Like, of course we should. Why wouldn't we fire people who obtain their credentials through fraud? I mean, of course you would. You would do it as a pilot. You do it anything else. Why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah.
But it really is a kind of identitarian sickness.
Okay, so let's take the 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and then take now. You know, it was funny because my particular cult leader always said you can't get somebody from A to B in one step. You have to program them in steps. What happened there? What happened where we had values and then we said, actually, our values are shit?
Oh, I could tell you exactly what happened. These are good questions. These are easy questions.
Next time I'll try and get questions that you can answer.
No, because
I'm still, I mean, I understand in a cult setting, but I'm still asking this question.
Oh, it's easy
because
to answer.
I'm like,
yeah, it's easy to answer. Okay, so what happened was that the canons of knowledge became compromised. So now they're completely corrupt, like totally corrupt.
How did they get compromised?
Okay, so to gain tenure at most places, I'm not saying it's everywhere, but virtually everywhere, you know, these basic requirements, you have to show up for class, et cetera. But most important is 7 papers in 7 years, peer-reviewed papers you have to publish.
Okay.
So the journals themselves became ideologically captured, less so in the hard sciences, that comes later, but certainly in the humanities. You could only publish papers if you conform to certain narratives, and then once you publish those papers, that would go into your promotion and tenure basket, and then you'd get tenure, which is a job for life. So what happened is slowly over time, the people who had morally unfashionable ideas, it's going to sound like a postmodern idea, maybe it is a little bit, but the people who had morally unfashionable ideas didn't get published and then didn't get tenure. But if you conform to the orthodoxy and the moral orthodoxy, that's an important point. If you conform to the orthodoxy, you're more likely to get your papers published. Once you did that, you start assigning your works and other works in the canon to your students. And then from there, it takes maybe 5 years that once those students get out, they've been indoctrinated into things that they think are true, but basically the purpose of education is to alleviate oppression, trigger warnings, safe spaces, microaggressions, et cetera. And then 5-10 years later, they become senior administrators, they become policymakers, they go into government, business, industry, et cetera. So it was an extraordinarily effective, that's one way, and the other way was linguistic. That's more complicated, but that's basically the way that they did it.
So it's almost like the way you work your way up in a corrupt system. Go along with
less so the system is corrupt, but more so that the ideas are corrupt because they're not based in reality. But there's another component to this, is that they had to change the meanings of basic words. Like equity and equality. They changed the meanings of words so that, they had a positive valence. Oh yeah, equity, of course I'm for equity. Well, what's it mean? I mean, Bernie Sanders has it on his, at least he did, I haven't looked at his page recently, but if his page is even up, had, equity as one of the main planks, and he went on Bill Maher, he couldn't even define equity. Biden in the debate, he was asked the difference between equity, he didn't know the difference between equity and equality. I mean, these people, this is insane. These are like major political, these are not obscure people running for town hall in the middle of a city with 5,000 people. These are presidential candidates. Who have explicitly made this their policy positions. And they can't define what it is that they're, it really is a wholesale ideological takeover. It's just astonishing. And anybody who points that out is a bad person, is a racist, is a Nazi, is a bigot, is a homophobe, is a trans, whatever kind of, but that's the only thing they have. They can't win by refutation of argument because they've dulled their ability to even, they don't even engage people. So they have to make it seem as if you're a bad person because you hold certain positions. Like the free speech guy I told you about.
Yeah.
He, instead of having an engaging conversation, we could have had a great conversation. He didn't even talk to me. He didn't even look at me. He's a bad person. Boghossian's a bad person.
So the large-scale censorship is probably coming from here as well. Just shut them up. Just stop them.
Well, it have to be.
Yeah.
It would have to be. The same people, by the way, who hate Jews. right? I mean, let's be completely clear about it. The same people who have been screaming about systemic discrimination have been systemically discriminating against Asians in higher education. Like, there's just, I mean, so that's the other thing. That's the other advantage that they possess in the culture war is they don't buy into, like, it's a kind of asymmetric warfare. Like, they don't buy into hypocrisy. They don't buy into Aristotle's law of non-contradiction. They don't buy into, you know, I published a piece, I called it Culture War 2.0, the Great Realignment. You know, they don't buy into the refutation of ideas. Why would they? They just call you a Nazi and say you're a rapist and start filing complaints against you.
When you say refutation of ideas, what do you mean exactly?
Well, it's, you know, it's an old dialectical. It's an idea that dates back over, you know, 2,400 years. Somebody says something and somebody else
For thesis, antithesis?
Yeah.
Right.
Because we have an exchange. Like I say, you know, hey, man, this is the best move. Whatever I say on the chessboard, or then we would engage that conversation.
Yeah.
But if you say to me, you know, we need more immigrants, or whatever you say, you know, I'm worried that, you know, I was walking over here, I was just amazed at the number of people sitting around. Almost every single person here has talked to me about the problem with the economy, right? If I said, well, you know, Peter Thiel calls the massive influx in immigration in England attacks on the middle class and below, and attacks on young people because they can't afford houses. And if I said that, rather than substantively engage the merits of the argument, I said, well, fuck you, Nazi. Fuck you. You just hate black people or brown people or blue, whatever people. Like, so they attempt to win by discrediting the person as opposed to engaging the argument. So that's a kind of poison, because you can never know if the beliefs you have are true. I mean, how would you know? The only way you know is if you engage them on the merits of the argument.
Right.
There's no other way.
So I've been thinking about exactly what you're saying, and I keep coming up with the people that do these behaviors, the fuck you, you're a Nazi or whatever. I keep on thinking about little kids that get caught doing something and it's clear that it happened, and instead of just acknowledging it, they have a tantrum about something else. They shift it over here. And I think, are we dealing with like 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds? Is that have we regressed that much?
Some people say they're cluster B personality disorder or something. I have a different take. I've said repeatedly that I'm going to make a prediction to you. I'm going to make it again, the prediction. There's really no there to any of this stuff. It's just monstrously stupid. There's nothing even remotely interesting about it. And some of these ideas are so ghastly and so horrifically dumb. Defund the police, believe all women, abolish prisons. They're just so stupid that once the spell is broken, as you know, Dan Dennett, the late Dan Dennett, my friend the philosopher, said, once that spell is broken, they will have to deny they ever believed it.
Yes.
They have no choice.
Yes.
They have no choice. They can't say, you know what, we thought this, we're wrong, we made a mistake, we're sorry, we're going to really make our best efforts to make sure that, no, they can't. They literally cannot do that.
See, the most liberating moment for me was when I said on fucking national television, I fucked up.
Yeah.
It was so liberating.
Right.
I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to hide. I didn't have to lie. So I wonder about those people that just want to say,
they can't. They're incapable of it.
I made a mistake.
They're literally incapable of it because, well, we can talk about that, but I'm going to predict that to you. You're not going to see institutions say, you know what, that now, thanks to Rufo and others' work, institutions are starting to dismantle these DEI bodies. You know, what do the Catholics say? You can only, what's the famous quote by Augustine? Something like, you need genuine contrition, right? Like, you need to say, we made a mistake, man, and we're not going to make that mistake. We're going to do everything in our power to figure out that how do we not be held hostage to these moral fads? Like, we're going to try to figure this out. That regains trust in the institutions.
It does.
It does. Not silently eliminating your diversity bodies and all the people you fucked over along the way.
Yeah.
I mean, these people have fucked over insane numbers of people. Like, and silence cast an incredible chill on intellectual discourse. I mean, just think of all the stuff we could have been doing if we weren't dealing with just complete idiots.
Yeah.
Total idiocy.
So another thing I've been thinking about is these ideas, these bad ideas, seems so divorced from like regular reality, from like cause and effect and gravity and this shit.
Yeah.
This is how shit works.
Yeah.
I suppose what Ayn Rand was trying to say, I suppose, to some degree. What do you think this impulse is away from reality? Because I feel like there's all these feelings that are associated with reality that people don't like anymore. So they've escaped into some kind of fantasy. Is that what's going on?
I don't know. Maybe I can't answer. Maybe it's a part of it. I don't know. I mean, it's like the South Park episode. You know, you can deny reality. You can attempt to hide from reality, but reality is going to come for you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're getting old. You want to believe eating pastries all day and ice cream and, you know, sitting around, lounging around, not working out with intensity. You want to believe that that's going to lead you to have the body of Adonis. There's nothing preventing you from doing that. We can't legislate it away. You can believe anything you want. Mm-hmm. But you do that long enough, you'll see what'll happen to your A1Cs.
Catch up, yeah. It'll catch up. I remember, you know, when I was in college, I would say things like, well, that's just your reality.
Right.
And that's what you're describing.
Right.
Like this unwillingness. It's sort of, I think it was very narcissistic of me. It's sort of like, well, this is my perspective, and like that thing. I didn't want to admit I was scared of that perspective.
Yeah.
I was scared of the self-examination. So I would, you know, become like a fucking peacock and say, well, that's just your reality. Like, I don't think that's true.
Okay. So that is going to be one of the things that I'm going to talk about in my talk here. And so I think the mistake, and now I'm going to adopt the kind of postmodern worldview as speaking from the person who believes. I don't believe this, just to be clear with you, but I'm going to adopt that.
Okay. You're going to channel, basically.
Yeah, but don't worry, it'd be clipped out 500 times saying that Boghossian's an idiot.
Probably.
So it's like a reality tunnel, and so you have your reality, I have my reality. Your reality happens to be facts and evidence. My reality has to be the unequivocal subjective testimony of people whose ancestors have been subject to certain historical conditions, slavery, for example. So what you have is a narrative. What I have is a narrative. Your narrative and my narrative, it's like you just have another narrative. I just have a narrative. Like, to really wrap your head around that, like, it's very hard for people who think in terms of facts and evidence. That's why, you know, I wrote about my last books, like, presenting someone with facts and evidence does not do what you think it will do. Now, the original study by Neiman and Reifler they call the backfire effect. People try to replicate it and they couldn't replicate it, and they said it's a unicorn thing. It was just a one-off. The problem with that is that I looked at those studies, and when I read those studies, almost invariably they don't have like, if I said to you, hey man, this is the best move on a chessboard just because the chessboard is there, or, you know, like something we can adjudicate quickly, like, you know, where Mongolia is, I'm looking at the map of Mongolia. We can adjudicate that somehow. But we have a much different situation now. I bet that it's isomorphic to the situation that you were in a cult, but on a larger scale. Yeah.
It sounds like it. One question for you: what's it like for you when you're doing sort of street epistemology?
Yeah.
What's it like watching somebody's light bulb go off? Like, where they suddenly go like, ah.
Rewarding, fulfilling, and tragic.
Why tragic?
I shouldn't have to be doing any of this. This isn't my job. Like, this has become my job, but the schools should be teaching them this. Like, we went on a university tours. You know, we go all over universities, and I'll always ask the kids, so, hey, you know, I'm not naming schools when I do this. I'm not dissing anybody's schools. I'm just saying, in general, ask the kid, how could that belief be wrong? Has anybody ever asked you how your belief could be wrong? No. Really? You're at a 4-year education, elite institution. No one's ever asked you that. I've yet to have a single person at all the schools we've gone to say, yep.
How do they react when you ask that question?
Surprised. I shouldn't have to be doing this around the world.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to be putting out these videos. The institution should be doing these things. But the purpose of the institution, the reason that street epistemology, spectrum street epistemology is not universally adopted in the schools is because, in spite of all the verbal behavior, their point is not to teach people how to think. That's not their point. Their point is to forward certain narratives that people will accept because they believe that accepting those narratives will create the kinds of just and egalitarian societies, or equity-based societies, probably perhaps more precise than egalitarian. Like, that's the point. So their point isn't to get people to genuinely reflect on their beliefs. The point is to get them to believe very specific conclusions about the nature of reality.
Man, it's been a while since I was in college. Good God.
Yeah.
Who do you get pushback from the most? Because I'm sure you get vilified.
Oh yeah, I have so many people hate me. Different things, different people. Who do I get pushed back on the most? Identitarian leftists give the most pushback. People on the far right, if they're, depending on how one defines that term, alt-right, again, these are nebulous, fuzzy terms that have become some pushback from them. I get, why don't you ever, to be clear, I think that the choice in this presidential election is a public disgrace. I can't stand either of these people. I think it's the worst possible choice for either of these people. It is a public disgrace that it's Harris and Trump. But people say, well, why don't you criticize, X policy proposal? Why don't you criticize? So I get, some, and some of those criticisms really are legitimate. And I mean, I don't know what more I can say. It does seem to me that it's been said before, the worst elements of the left are mentally ill, and the worst elements of the right are mentally retarded. I said that years ago, and I saw that pop up in someone's Twitter feed, and I don't know if he got it from me or she or whatever, but yeah.
Do you like being proven wrong about something?
I do. I thought about it because I wanted to make sure that my response was universal. Yeah, I do. In fact, Brett Hall just gave a truly wonderful attempted evisceration at some of my beliefs that I believe with Richard Dawkins. We believe it's a very obscure area of epistemology, and the way he did that criticism was extraordinary. And I want that to be true in a certain extent because I want to believe in the emancipatory hope of reason and rationality. I don't think it is, but I'm going to go on his show and talk about it. So yeah, I do, and I'm thinking about it in a very practical sense. Like, I want to get better at jiu-jitsu. I want to get my black belt in jiu-jitsu. So if I'm making a mistake, of course I want to know that I'm wrong. And it kind of reminds me, I've only seen Seinfeld one time in one episode, and by sheer coincidence, I saw the same episode twice. It was people's houses. The episode where they go and they get ice cream, and they were told that it's like, I don't know, sugar-free or something, and it turns out to not be sugar-free.
Yes.
And they were really bummed about that. Like, they were angry. But, I mean, of course I would want to know that's true. Yeah. Like, I mean, of course I would want to know that because then I can make the best decisions to bring about my flourishing. So why wouldn't I want to know? Even in matters of the heart, I would want to know. Like if I'm with somebody and she's banging the whole football team or something, like I would want to know that too. Like I would want to know. Of course, because I want to know true things, even if it comes at a price.
Even if it hurts, yeah.
It's like Carl Sagan talked about that a little bit, but
right, yes. I have found for myself that when people ask me questions, I no longer, when I was in the cult, I would regurgitate some shit that I learned, some shit that I read, something that sounded smart. And when people ask me questions now, like I'm always checking in, like, how do I feel about it now? When I say feel, I mean, what's true for me now?
Yeah.
And it seems to me in some of the interviews I've seen of you, you seem to do something similar. You're like constantly checking.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I think so. I mean, the part of the problem is just, again, to use the word I use, there's just so much static. It's hard to differentiate criticism from just angry lunatics.
You've been on the internet recently, have you?
Well, yes, I make the mistake every once in a while of doing that. Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's why it's really important that you have to figure out whose voice doesn't matter. And the older I get, the more I almost no one's voice matters, but the people whose voice matters. Like I said, Richard, Richard Dawkins and I are going to do this thing, and we just had dinner the other night, and like if he said something to me like, "Hey man, like you said this and this is way off base," like I'm like, "Oh, okay, well I need to think about that." Or that Brett Hall thing I told you about. It was really such a thoughtful criticism that, and I texted Michael Shermer about that, and he said, like he might. I probably shouldn't say this on air, but he's like, well, I think he might be right. We need to think about some of those things. But that's the virtue. That's what we should look for in our friendships. Like that's the kind of thing we should look for in our relationships. Not like, well, fuck this guy. Who the hell is it? Like we need to think about those intellectual virtues as well. That's why Shermer and I are such good friends.
Interesting. It's been a long time since I've seen him.
Yeah, he's doing great. He's biking everywhere.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he bikes everywhere, and he listens to everything at double speed.
Oh God, I can't do that.
Oh, I do it.
Sometimes I do 1.5 though.
I do it almost everything at double speed.
Really?
Yeah, and that's how he knows. Like you listen to his podcast, like holy shit! Like, well, he knows that not because he sits down and reads. It's like it's much faster, and he's biking 5-6 hours a day, so he's taking that in. That's what I did when I came over here. I'm just listening to stuff.
All right.
Yeah.
There's a question. Oh, by the way, there's this meme I just saw from somebody on Twitter. I have a mental illness that makes me think that people will change their minds if I present the correct arguments with the appropriate facts and data.
Correct, and we just talked about that.
So I have one question from Richard Grannon.
Yeah.
He said that, I'm not sure if he said that you said this or somebody said this.
Yeah.
Is it true that people who have high IQ are more susceptible to ridiculous ideology than people with lower IQ?
Oh, I thought you were going to say something else.
Oh, what do you think I was going to say?
Oh, I thought you were going to say something that I can't call him my friend Pine Creek because he almost never returns my calls or texts. But this guy Doug Pine Creek said is that less intelligent people are less capable of making hypotheticals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like you really need to let that percolate and then detonate, because that's like, talk about a statement of despair. Like that's such a holy shit. But anyway, what was that one again?
High IQ people more susceptible to ridiculous ideas?
No, that's not true. Shermer disbelieves. Shermer writes about that in The Believing Brain. No, that's I think chapter 9. I can't remember, but or 7, some odd chapter. But no. Why smart people believe weird things? No, it just means they're better at rationalizing or reasoning to a bad explanation for a thing.
Is it also that pattern recognition, that they can recognize patterns better in a society where going along with those patterns is better for you? Could it be that?
No,
as well?
I mean, I published a piece about that I think it's called Deluded Departments, which my colleagues lost their mind about in the Philosopher's Magazine. I think I co-published it with my writing partner, James Lindsay. But when groups of smart people get together, they become even better at rationalizing than sole agents, and then they become that's what I think the last line in that piece was something like, the gatekeepers of reason have fallen. They then become mouthpieces for the dominant orthodoxy. And that's what you're seeing right now. That's why, they're providing the intellectual infrastructure, or the horsepower, to be a better word, for the mass psychosis that's overtaken society.
It's almost like, I don't know if you're saying this, but it's almost like they have an impulse to do something, they do the thing, and then they have to rationalize why they did the thing. That sounds good and reasonable.
Yeah, or they just believe the thing because they think it's true, but the only reason they think it's true is because it's morally fashionable and they've reasoned their way backward.
Right.
That's why people, for example, you can see that to a certain extent with young Earth creationism. I just had a conversation with Jonathan Prejeot online. I've invited a few, and I invited a Christian apologist to come on and talk to me on my show. I think those are really interesting conversations that illustrate a lot. Jonathan's a good friend of. I like Jonathan. I was hanging out with him in London. He's a good friend of Peterson's. I fundamentally disagree with him, but that's the other thing, that we think we can't be friends with people. I'm about to go to Hungary. Rod Dreyer's a good friend of mine, and Rod isn't a genuinely believing Christian. I mean, he is if to all the atheists listening to this, if you think nobody actually believes that, that's not true. I can tell you for a fact that Rod believes that. I would literally bet my life that he believes that. So, we've become friends, and I think it's really good, by the way, just parenthetically, to have friends who don't believe the same stuff you do.
Yes. On the flip side of that, how do you maintain evenness, because you seem to,
Yeah.
in the face of some really stupid shit and some really stupid thinking? Like, how do you do it? Because you just seem to be like curious about what you're hearing.
Yeah, I get that question a lot. It's super easy when I do the street epistemology stuff because I really am genuinely curious as to why someone believes it. Like, I'm legitimately curious.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone knows something I don't know, I want to know what it is. Or if someone has a way of reasoning that I haven't figured out yet, I want to like, why wouldn't I want to know that? And, getting angry about it doesn't do anything. I mean, sometimes I've lost my temper once, but barely. But, there's some things that people can say, like, oh, you don't ever have people on the left on your show. Like that pisses me off. And I'd lost my temper once in the last 20 years, and I really lost it. And I was in London, and somebody came by in a bike, and so now, I just have my phone case.
Mm-hmm.
But before, I used to have my phone case with my credit cards and everything in there.
Mm-hmm.
And they picked my phone. They tried to steal my phone out of my hands. So consequently, I had to separate my credit cards. I can't put my email on the phone. I mean, they would have gotten unlocked, open phone. Like, it would have been. And I literally think I would have killed somebody.
Mm.
I lost my temper. I never lose my temper. And it was such an the whole thing was just so, it just put me into a rage.
Mm.
But that's the only time I think in 20 years, maybe 25 years, I've actually lost my temper. I never lose my temper. I never raise my voice. I
mean, you seem that way. You seem genuinely curious about like why somebody thinks the thing they're thinking or saying.
Yeah. I mean, I've actually been, doing jujitsu with guys and who lost their temper and they just started punching me in the head. Doesn't happen much, but it's happened twice. But no, I never. I don't get upset. I mean, I'm not. This isn't verbal behavior. I'm really genuinely curious, like why people believe stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm really curious about it, and I try to model the behavior that I want to see. So if I want them to just be cool and even-handed and revise their beliefs, that's why sometimes if we can't find another person to go on the line or the mats, that's why I do it too.
Oh, I was wondering about that.
Because I can model that behavior. I can say, and the other thing is, like, I wouldn't ask people to do something that I wouldn't do myself. I'm not going to go around the world and ask people to do this if I'm not willing to do it.
Actually, just along those lines,
Yeah.
How do you teach people that thought that they're having is not them, that it's just a thought? Like, how do you teach people that?
That's a great question. There are a lot of ways to do that. One is that diffeasability question. What would it take to change your mind? The other,
because that separates at the distance. Okay,
correct. Yeah. Because the problem with, and it's this Socrates question. I'm not saying it's a bad question at all. In fact, it's a good question. But if I say to you, well, why do you believe that? The overwhelming majority of people will tell me why they believe it. Especially as it extends into religious or moral things. But you telling me why you believe it increases your confidence in the belief. But almost no one is. That's why as I get older, I frontline the question, what would it take for you to change your mind? I don't even really need to know what people believe. I need to know a basic, how they use words, because that's a lot of it. But a lot of the confusion comes because it's a linguistic confusion. They use words differently. And some words are inherently slippery. So that's one thing. That's one way to do it. And another way to do it is, and the cult literature is on this, that when you build rapport with people, it's much easier for them what intersectionality does is it quote unquote goes down. And I've always advocated going quote unquote up. So finding supraordinate conditions, like finding things that bind you, finding commonalities. You're American, or whatever, you like sushi or whatever. I love to eat, whatever it is. You see that video of that woman eating 50 oysters?
Yes.
God, it was awesome.
Yes.
Like that woman, I would love to eat with that woman. I would. I wouldn't even want to date her. I just want to eat with her. I mean, it's just like, so that's an example of a superordinate thing. Like she loves to eat oysters. I love to eat oysters. I would just have so much fun with anybody eating oysters.
Right.
It's just like a fun thing.
It's more uniting than the
and then when you do that, then you have a conversation over 50 oysters. Like, why do you believe this? Tell me about this. And we have the disagreement. So then you're not looking at each other as an ideological enemy. You have a common. But even within that, to be more granular, I'll throw something out at you. So I've been thinking about this. I heard Peterson say years ago, I don't know if I heard him say this or he said to me, I can't remember, but that people don't go to his lectures to hear what he knows. They go to hear him work out things in real time.
Yeah.
So I'll throw something out that I've been thinking about on that vein. So I think that there are certain activities that in which people engage that increases the likelihood of them developing genuine virtue-based friendships.
Mm.
And there are certain activities that do not do that. So eating oysters with someone, man or woman, even as extreme as that video was, a 50 oyster thing, that will not do that.
Mm.
But like everywhere I go in the world, I do jujitsu. Reed told me not to talk about jujitsu anymore. I'm going to talk about jujitsu a little bit. And so like yesterday, was it yesterday? Yeah, it was yesterday. Everywhere I go, I become friends or very friendly with people. Like I'm going out to dinner tomorrow with a guy, and then the next day another guy that I met there. But I think that if you had a common thing that you like to do, like build model trains with someone, I think that would be less of an immediate bonding activity than something like fixing someone's parachute who jumps out of like the larger the chance of injury and death, then you have to trust that individual more, and that already kind of puts it in fast mode, any kind of relationship that you want. And once you have that, it's very easy to have conversations about beliefs and ideologies about which you disagree, because you have a common bond.
Yes.
And what we're doing now is we're training people to do exactly the opposite. Oh, this is a black person. Oh, this is a woman. Or this is a whatever. But that's a toxin to any kind of emancipatory discourse.
Yeah.
I mean, it just is. And then the people who don't see that are either lying or they're idiots.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's the other thing. Our institutions have not merely been captured by an ideology, but they're just wholesale midwits. I mean, these people are just extraordinarily mediocre minds. These are not intelligent, thoughtful people. Just giving you one very quick example, not of that, but of how society plays the role. When you're in Taiwan, I'm pretty sure this is in mainland China as well, when you go to big sporting events, and I know this, I don't speak like, Royal Pinpicho, I want a cold beer, even though I don't drink beer.
Yeah.
I know this because someone who was our guide told us this, who speaks fluent Mandarin and English. When you go to sporting events, when they announce these big events, these are not local events, these are like regional events. The announcer the first thing they'll do is they'll thank the principals for the school for attending, because that's what they value. And then they'll thank the politicians, but the principals are thanked first. So it has a kind of cachet and prestige.
That is interesting.
Yeah, it's a cultural shift. We're incapable of making it.
Just to go back for a second to the thing about who you are and your thoughts being different, I think I'm no longer, I don't know what I believe in terms of spirituality. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Like I have a feeling of a connection to something that feels quite beyond me, and like, wow, that's really cool. But I'm not going to like kill anybody about it,
Yeah, it's good.
But I do.
Good plan.
I do. Yeah, I don't do that shit. But I do. I have sat in meditation and been like a sense of like a center, and then a sense of a thought or a feeling, and watching it transition, and it emerges like fucking smoke and then evaporates, and I go like, okay, that's not me. That's how I kind of got there. Because I think for the longest time, I was so attached to my thinking. I desperately wanted to be smart.
God, you're the second person who said that to me.
I don't give a shit anymore.
Why? Yeah, why was that important? I can't figure out why would that be important to anybody.
I think it was my value back when I was a kid.
But who cares if you're smart?
Well, because I got praised for like doing smart shit, and then I thought, well, I'm going to do more of that.
Behaviorally reinforced. Yeah. Well, I mean, who gives a shit?
So then I became a straight A student, and then I burnt out, and now I don't give a shit. Now I'm just interested in like. I'm just interested in stuff and people and like how shit works and how people work.
Yeah, I mean, so for all those people watching this to be like, oh yeah, I really want to be smart. I mean, there's nothing kind of wrong with that. I mean, people just have a G or general intelligence, but I would much rather people look at me as a good guy than a smart guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, who gives a shit if you're smart? Smart people are, they can be assholes, they can be good people. That does not. It's not a prophylactic against cruelty.
Yeah. Yeah. Great conversation, man.
Cool. Right on.
I really, really appreciate your time and you taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah,
I know you're doing a lot of stuff here in Lisbon.
Yeah. Well, we've been busy. I'm really looking forward to this conference, and it really is a shame. I mean, it's a legitimate shame that the WPATH people wouldn't come on stage and talk to me. And I mean, it really would be like, okay, let's really try to figure out what you believe and why you believe it. Like, tell people, because we have to. I mean, you know, Reed said that the bridge isn't just burned; the bridge is scorched. Oh, that's the other thing that happened that dinner. The woman next to me said, "Well, why don't you invite them to why don't you invite them privately?" And I'm thinking to myself, well, like, here's a conversation who's private, and we can't even have a conversation with the guy who, like, so, you know, we just have a lot of ills. But the good news is we can overcome all of this stuff. I mean, this is all, I mean, we're going to get out of this current derangement syndrome very, very shortly. And I think it's taught us all lessons. And everyone who's looked back on history, well, how could you do this? Or how could you do that? Or all these people are saying, you know, oh, the Muslims should come out and speak out. Are you fucking kidding me? Dude, those people will chop your head off. Where were you when this shit was going on? You wouldn't even, like, you know, risk people being mean to you on social media. And you want these people to risk their lives? Are you kidding me?
Yes.
So, like, you know, it's also, if you're going to face this with even an iota of humility and decency, you have to say to yourself, okay, like, there has to be some kind of acknowledgement that you made a mistake. Yeah. It's like the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Like, you have to say, I made a mistake. And ideally, what you would do is you'd say, I'm sorry. Like, isn't that what the whole Alcoholics Anonymous is? Like, I made a mistake. I treated you this way. I'm sorry. Yeah. Like, this is not a great lift. Like, this is not a tremendous ask.
No.
It doesn't cost you any money. Like, and it will make you a better person.
Yeah.
So there you have it.
A fucking man. Peter, thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And ladies and gents, as always, stay curious.